Welcome to the Washington Week Extra. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. I want to welcome back Caitlin Dickerson of The Atlantic. We are going deeper into her 18-month investigation into the Trump administration's policy of separating migrant children from their families. Most notably, she wrote this week that separating children was not just a side effect of the policy, but it was the intent. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for being here. You spent, I know, a lot of time on this, 30,000 words, one of the longest articles ever published in The Atlantic. What is the thesis of your article? What do you want people to really take away when you think about what you want to illuminate through this reporting?
Well, the thesis of my article is kind of multifold. One point I want to make really clear to people is that family separations isn't something that came out of the mind of Donald Trump for the first time or Stephen Miller, his chief immigration advisor. This is something that was initially proposed in 2014 under the Obama administration by a lifelong border enforcement official. And it's really the culmination of a concept called prevention by deterrence, which has been the centerpiece of our immigration enforcement apparatus since 9/11. So, this didn't come out of left field, if you will, and it also, we still don't have safeguards to prevent it from coming back. And that's despite, the dozens of government officials I interviewed who all said they agreed this wasn't a good idea. We wish it hadn't happened. And when I asked them, why didn't you stand up? Why didn't you say something? I would hear things like, it wasn't my position, or it wouldn't have been strategic for me to push back. And that's how you end up with a policy like this being put into place.
And Caitlin, you at one point in the article, and it gave me goosebumps. You talk about the fact that as you were talking to officials for this story, they were handling their children. They were talking about their children. They were dropping them off. Why did you want to include that in the article? Why is it so important to really help people understand the mindset of the officials that you were talking to?
I included those details of the officials who were involved with family separations and the times that they mentioned their own children to me because I found it so striking, because we would be having conversation about immigration policy that felt to me completely divorced at times from the human impact. It seemed like these officials forgot about the children who their decisions were affecting or who were being affected by their decisions while they were still, caring for and nurturing and loving, their children, of course, without question, and in a way that, they would, like they just had no, they didn't seem to draw a connection between the two groups of children. And that for me, and I think it sounds like for you too, was really striking. And it just felt like pointing out because, without that dissonance, without that disconnection from the migrant children, I don't think a decision like this could have really been made.
It's such an important and striking part of your reporting. I want to now put up a graphic for folks because it's something that is on the cover of The Atlantic, but it's also something that, of course, we wanted to point out. In May 2018, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions agreed to speak with the U.S. attorneys stationed on the southwestern border. And you write, quote, his responses seemed out of touch with reality. Several of the attorney's notes about the call record that Sessions articulated a central goal. And you quote Sessions as saying, we need to take away children. We talked about the fact that this was a lot of people who were doing this to get this to the point where we were separating families. But talk about Jeff Sessions in particular and that quote.
Sure. So the five U.S. attorneys who were stationed along the southwest border had almost no advance warning that zero tolerance was coming. And as soon as they found out about it, each of them reached out to the Department of Justice headquarters, independent of each other, to say, we don't have the resources to do this. We don't think that this is a good idea. But their concerns eventually make their way up to the Attorney General, who agrees to this phone call where these attorneys are looking for assurances. They're looking really for a change in policy because they're saying, we don't think this is a good idea. But instead, what they hear from Jeff Sessions, who was the Attorney General at the time, were these general kind of platitudes. We need to crack down. We need to take away children. We've got to secure the border, with no real detail or information to help them. Needless to say, these attorneys walked away from the discussion feeling even worse than they had gone into it. And this is even before they realized, because of the way that our immigration system works, these attorneys didn't even know that the children were going to be turned over to an entirely separate federal agency and sent to shelters, across the country.
Mm. I also want to put up another graph for folks. It's a graphic of your article. It is the Trump administration's initiative that separated thousands of families should be studied by future generations, you write. Of organizational psychologists and moral philosophers, it raises questions that have residents far beyond one policy. You write in particular, when one's understand what happens when one's understanding of the line between right and wrong gets overridden by a boss's screaming insistence. Why do you think this issue should be studied? Why do you think that those questions have to be asked and answered?
I think this is a story about personal responsibility. And, we started off our discussion by talking about the fact that, the bureaucrats who were moderates, who said they opposed family separation, but at the end of the day didn't really stand up to say so in any meaningful way, they were just as critical to this policy being implemented as the people who were very openly and aggressively pushing for it. And so, I heard these excuses about, the way the bureaucratic structure works and this idea that, it's not designed for people to stand up to their supervisors and say, you know what, no, I don't think that this order that you just gave me is the right way to go. But it does take that sense of, where is a red line? What are red lines? And what does it take for me to stand up and decide that I don't want to cross them? I mean, it takes a certain level of bravery and just a real sense of personal responsibility to stop something like this from happening in the future. And that's why I think there's a broader lesson in this story for all of us.
Yeah. You also write about Alma Acevedo. She was working at Bethany Christian Services in Michigan. This is the third graphic that we want to put up for folks. You wrote she learned not to give separated children any specific timeline for when they might see their parent again because the children would latch on to those promises, however vague, and then ask about them constantly. I mean, when you think about that, children wanting to know a basic question, which is when am I going to see my mom and dad again? Tell me more about what you learned in talking to and talking to Alma and what you learned about the sort of horrors that these children had to go through.
So it's worth noting that Alma and her colleagues are experts in dealing with childhood trauma. They've gone to school for this, they're trained for it, and dealing with separated children made them feel like they were in completely over their heads. They'd never seen this level of distress in all the children that they'd treated in their careers. So when family separations begin really in secret in 2017, over a year before the Trump administration acknowledged it publicly, there was also no advance warning to these shelters like the ones where Alma worked. And so all of a sudden you have children, you have infants. A baby, I was told, was dropped off like an Amazon package at one of these shelters. Alma cared for countless infants and toddlers and very young children who would arrive in her care completely inconsolable. She and her colleagues threw out, the typical way that their days used to function, where they would give lessons and they had some structure and some order. All of that went out the window because the children were in such distress. All they could do was play movies or music, anything that they could do to calm these classrooms down, because they said that all it took was, one child to start crying and just set off the entire room because they were so fragile and they were so desperate for information about where their parents were.
And Caitlin, one last question. This was an extraordinary week of news for all sorts of things. We were so focused on Donald Trump and the search warrants, and those things are, of course, important. But when you think about sort of the history and the legacy of the Trump administration, why did you want to spend 18 months doing this investigation? Why do you think that we should still be talking about family separation in this moment?
Several reasons. One is that there are hundreds of families who to this day still have not been reunited. I mean, there are over 150 children whose parents the U.S. government still has not even found. Alejandro Mayorkas, our current DHS secretary, is quoted in the story, and he says that, some forms of deterrent immigration enforcement policies can be arguably defensible or can at least be reasonably debated. But this one, he said, falls outside of anything that a humane society would countenance. I think what he's speaking to there are those lasting effects that you still see even among the families that have been reunified. And there's also the added piece here, which is that the administration was dishonest about what it was doing. Again, regardless of political party, misleading the public and misleading Congress about what you're doing, especially what you're doing with children, really falls outside the bounds of anything that this democracy was set up to support.
Well, Caitlin, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much for your reporting. It's great reporting. Again, it's in the Atlantic. You should definitely go on their website. For those there, you can listen to it. It takes 3 hours to listen to. I listen to it. It's a great piece and really illuminates one of the worst chapters, frankly, and an ongoing chapter, unfortunately, in our nation's history. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. Good night from Washington.